Today, I'm talking about how I got through job interviews as a late diagnosed autistic person. And I was kind of compelled to make this video really because I have had 50 jobs in my life, well, actually over 50 jobs. And I did do another video about this, which I'll link below. But I've had the occasional comment since then actually asking how I was able to get through interviews because they're obviously really stressful for very many autistic people. So I thought I'd just summarise what I found helpful. But I do need to be really clear that this is in no way an advice video because I relied on a huge amount of masking during my interviews, and this is not a behaviour that I want to encourage in other autistic people, because I do want to be as transparent as I can on this channel. So this video is really just a response to those who are interested to hear how I got through interviews. So firstly, before the interview, I found preparation in the form of rest and relaxation really helpful. So I would always ensure that the night before an interview, I would have nothing to do essentially, because I know that I would be in some kind of state of anxiety. So I would try and reduce that where possible. So I would just take a long bath and, I don't know, watch some kind of cozy movies, and maybe I'd be also researching about the company or organisation that I was going for an interview at. So I felt as kind of rested as I could before the big day. I found it really helpful to work out where I was going before the actual day of the interview, because it's really nerve-wracking, isn't it, to have to go to a new environment and talk to new people. So I wouldn't want to also be worrying about getting lost on the way or not knowing which door to go into if it's a big building. So I would always take the time out and do a practice run if I had to drive somewhere, or walk to the building beforehand, so I could visualise exactly where I needed to go on the day. Choosing what to wear can be really difficult for interviews as well. Well, certainly I found it to be, but I was able to devise a kind of strategy really that if it was a kind of more corporate workplace, then they'd expect me to kind of wear like a suit. But if it was, I don't know, say like a charitable sector job, casual smart attire is absolutely fine for those kinds of environments really. So it's really about researching the organisation before, and also to try on your outfits a few days beforehand as well, so you know exactly what you're going to be wearing on the day. And I try and make them as comfortable as I could. You know, I used to wear heels years ago for job interviews, but as I got older, this just wasn't comfortable for me. So I'd always try and wear flat shoes because I just find them more comfortable really. And the more comfortable you are in your clothes, of course, the less distracted you'll be by your clothes as well. Arriving in good time is always good practice for interviews, but arriving in good time doesn't mean arriving really early. And you know, I've really learned my lesson with this, because I think if you arrive too early, it can look a little strange to prospective employers. So I found the sweet spot to be around 10 minutes. And I found this to be sufficient time to be able to talk to a receptionist or whatever person who's welcoming you, and to sit in the waiting area. But it's not so long that it's kind of awkward for anybody. So yeah, about 10 minutes I would say is the ideal time. So generally speaking, the interviewer or perhaps another member of staff will come through to reception, and they'll then take you through to the interview room. And at this point, it may be a case that you'll, have a handshake with the other person. And I really don't like handshakes, if I'm honest. And this is one of the more tricky aspects of a interview for me. But it's these ridiculous societal rules. For whatever reason, we have to do these handshakes. But it is something that I personally struggle with. and on handshakes. I found it helpful to give quite a confidence, firm handshake. So they're not too firm, so you're not really squeezing the other person's hands, but I think it's almost seen as a sign of confidence, really, if you do have quite a firm handshake. Well, it certainly worked for me anyway. At the beginning of interviews, I would often be asked if I wanted a drink, and it took me a long time to learn only ever to ask for a glass of water. Firstly, because water is really helpful, because if your kind of throat dries up or something like that, it's really useful. Um, but in the early days, I'd always ask for a cup of tea, which just seems such a ridiculous thing to me now, because firstly, it's a really hot drink, so you have to wait for it to cool down. And there have been instances where I've been in the interview and the tea has just been too hot to drink for the whole duration of the interview. So I felt kind of rude leaving it. And also, if I was able to drink the tea, it just really demonstrates to the interviewer how nervous I was, because I'd almost be a bit shaky, really. So yeah, it was almost like a beacon to say, "Oh, I'm really nervous." So yeah, I learned just to ask for that glass of water. So going into the interview itself, I found interview formats to be, I don't want to say easy, because they're not, they're really nerve-wracking, but I quite like the to and fro of conversation, because you never have to kind of butt in at any points. Everything is kind of clear and easy to understand in terms of knowing when it's your turn to talk. During the interview, I've learned that interviewers really like eye contact, and this is really challenging for autistic people, isn't it? Or very many autistic people, and certainly for me, whenever I make eye contact, it's always at a conscious level. I'm always very aware of when I'm making eye contact with people. It's not something that comes kind of naturally to me. I always have to make the choice or the decision to look at somebody. So I'm very often telling myself during an interview process to look at the interviewer or interviewers, if it's a panel, as much as possible. And of course, this can be really difficult, because I know I am prone to losing concentration levels whenever I'm making too much eye contact. So it really is kind of a balance, really. And interview questions are deeply nerve-wracking, aren't they? Because you have to kind of formulate an answer in the here and now. And if you're like me, sometimes it's really hard to depend on your brain to come up with the right answer in the right moments. But fortunately, many interviews will follow a similar structure and ask pretty similar questions, actually, well, certainly in my experience anyway. So I thought I'd go through a few frequently asked interview questions, really to give you an idea of how I responded to them. So tell me about yourself. And this is just a horrifying question, isn't it? And I think it's probably the worst question you can be asked as an autistic person, or indeed a neurotypical person, because how on earth do you answer it? It is so open-ended. However, I have learned through my 50 plus interviews that they're not really interested in you as a person. What they are interested in is basically what you're up to in your career at the moment, maybe a bit about your previous jobs, and possibly a little bit about maybe your hobbies. So, for example, if I was going for, I don't know, a customer service job, I would say something along the lines of, I'm Lizzie and I currently work as a customer service representative in such and such an organisation, and I've worked there for the last 4 years. And as part of my role, I deal with customer inquiries, I deal with customer complaints, and I also deal with email correspondence as well. And previously to this role, I've also worked in a few customer service roles as well as an administration job as well. So I believe I have a really good understanding of yeah, what it takes to be a good customer service representative. Outside of my work, I have a real interest in the arts, and I really enjoy oil painting in my spare time as well. So basically what I've done here is give them quite a lot of information that is relevant to the role that I'm applying for. I've also given them a little bit of information about what I'm like as a person outside of my workplace. But I've managed to keep it really brief and really succinct because, as I say, it's such an open-ended question. You could go on forever, but I found that actually they don't want a whole lot of information to this particular question. Why did you apply for this role? And I found this quite a difficult question to answer because I really wanted to say, I'm applying for this job because I don't like my current job, but of course, they don't want to hear honesty like that. So I found it beneficial to try and keep things as positive as possible. So I would never be negative about my current workplace because a new employer doesn't want to hear that. So I kind of kept it along the lines of I am really seeking out a new challenge where I can bring all of my energy, enthusiasm, and experience to. And yeah, just something along the lines of I kind of relish new challenges and I feel the time is right to start on something new. So yeah, it's about what I found anyway, being as positive as possible, really. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And, I don't even know where they get these questions from, really. And this is a really common one to be asked. And I absolutely hate it, but I did come up with some strategies around it. So, in terms of strengths, you can say anything that's kind of positive about yourself, really, in terms of the workplace. So, it could be that you're kind of super reliable, you've got a keen eye for detail, that kind of stuff, really. Anything that's positive within a kind of work remit. In terms of weaknesses, I think the employer here is looking for areas of self reflection or self development almost. So, I don't know if that quite makes sense, but I'll give you an example. So, for an area of weakness, I might say something like, I get really frustrated with myself when I don't know the full answer to a problem. So, particularly in a new job, if I'm not fully aware of the, I don't know, policies and procedures. But what I will do is to take this as a learning opportunity. So I will find out what the answer is so that I feel fully prepared for the next time that this opportunity might arise in the future. So I think they're basically looking for a weakness that you've been able to identify in your behaviours, but you've almost been able to rectify in other ways. So that's certainly something that's worked for me with this particular question. Tell me how you handled a difficult situation. And this for me is almost like the strengths and weaknesses kind of question in terms of the weakness elements. So it's really kind of how you overcame adversity, really. So how you identified maybe something negative and was able to kind of turn it into a positive somehow. So a common answer I'd give for this one is that in one of my jobs, I would have to create a weekly newsletter in a charity that I worked for. So I would take kind of news and events from the whole sector and I'd basically kind of summarise stuff in a newsletter. However, it was really difficult in terms of deadlines to get everybody to send me all the stuff that they needed. And in particular, my boss And this was really stressful at times because it meant that the newsletter would go out really late some Fridays. So it meant that I was working late as well. So I started to send out regular email reminders to my boss. So it was really a case of managing your own manager. And this proved really helpful actually. So I was able to get all the information into the newsletter on time. So it just really streamlined the whole process of making and sending out the newsletter in good time. So yeah, it's just really demonstrating how you got over something that was a bit difficult in the workplace. I think sometimes, if you're like me, you can hear the word difficult and think of really kind of almost superlative instances in the workplace, something quite dramatic, but difficult can kind of mean anything really. And of course, not having the information that I needed in time to produce a quality newsletter was, proving difficult for me. So I set in place some practical solutions really. So I was able to send out this newsletter on time. What are your salary expectations? And this is very often discussed in the interview process. And I would say at this stage, this is something that you'll need to research beforehand because obviously the salary depends on the job role and the area you're working in. So somebody would be paid at a higher rate in London, for instance, as they would elsewhere in the country. So it's really about, just putting in a bit of research beforehand on that one. At the end of an interview, I would often be asked, do you have any questions? And I found it really beneficial to make sure that I've always has a question available because I think it shows real interest in the role and in the workplace. So it may well be useful to research the organisation, so you could ask an industry specific question, or I would sometimes ask something along the lines of, what opportunities do you have in place for staff developments? I should mention also that depending on the job that you're going for, I know in some kind of administration roles that you may be asked to complete a test while you're there. And this could be in the form of maybe creating a spreadsheet or summarising a piece of text, something like that, really. But what I will say about this is that you should be notified of this before the interview. So you should be told that there will be a test element to your interview. Now then, sometimes you are not going to vibe with the interviewer. In my experience, I'd say that this doesn't happen very often because, usually speaking, an interviewer or the person doing the interview will go out of their way to be cordial and pleasant and polite. But very occasionally, yeah, it does happen when you will not or cannot vibe with that person. And I think it's happened to me certainly a couple of times. However, I found that if you are in an interview scenario and it's kind of clear you're, yeah, not gelling with the interviewer, um, I'd say it's still a useful process to go through an interview. It's not something that you have access to do every day, and it's always kind of good practice, yeah, to go through an interview because it will help you the next time you go to an interview because it gives you just a little bit more experience in this kind of nerve-wracking environment because I found that the longer I left it between interviews, the more kind of nervous I'd be about them actually. So I'd never take it as a negative. I honestly took it as an opportunity, really just to practice my communication skills, really. And also, I should mention that nerves are okay during interviews because I think sometimes we really worry about how obvious our nervousness is within an interview setting. But I try to remind myself that I would say the vast majority of people going for an interview are going to be nervous in some kind of degree or some kind of capacity. It's just some people hide it better than others. So I certainly wouldn't see it as a negative if you've worried that you've appeared too nervous during an interview, because I think most recruiters actually want to have a blend of introverts and extroverts personalities within a workplace, because they all bring something kind of unique to the fore, really. Do you disclose being autistic in an interview? And this is just a massive question. And in all honesty, I can't answer that for anybody else because it's such a personal thing, isn't it? And it's, yeah, something that each autistic person has to reflect on an individual basis. There is no legal requirements, certainly here in the UK, to disclose being autistic. So, yeah, it's a tough one to figure out, I think. But maybe this is something that I'll come back to in a future video because, as I say, I don't think there's a right answer to this one. So, at the end of the interview, what I found tends to happen is that it firstly will be really clear when the end of the interview is about to happen, because they will tell you. And if you struggle with social cues as I do, it's really nice to know when things are coming to an end, so you don't actually have to work out when you have to kind of remove yourself from the room. Generally speaking, at the end, the interviewer will tell you the process for what will happen next. So they may well say, we have a few other people to interview and we will contact you maybe in a few days' time. But generally speaking, at this stage, they may well take you back to reception and it's another opportunity for a handshake. And I'll say something like, thank you for your time, it's been really nice to meet you, or hope to hear from you soon, something like that, really. So yeah, and then I'll get outside and, have a great big sigh of relief. And I think, according to my notes here, that kind of summarises, yeah, everything that I've learned about interviews and certainly how I got through them. And I do need to remind you that I'm not giving any advice in this video. I'm just sharing my experiences for those who may find it helpful, or if they've got, an interview coming up and they're a bit nervous about it. It's sometimes nice to hear how other people kind of dealt with them, really. So that's my only intention in making this video. I'd love to know actually if you have any questions that relate specifically to job interviews, because I may well do a follow-up video to this at some point. I just wanted to kind of summarise all of the kind of obvious stuff in this video, but I'm sure there are sort of questions out there as well that I'll be happy to answer in a future video. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.